Order. Questions to the Prime Minister. Mrs. Emma Newell-Buck.
Question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others, and in addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Mrs. Emma Newell-Buck.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given his commitment to equality, will the Prime Minister explain why 75% of his cabinet are still men?
I think the honourable lady is being a little bit churlish. When the government before my one had 4 women cabinet ministers and 3 additional women attending cabinet. We now have 5 full members of the cabinet and an additional 3 attending, so more people attending. In terms of the Conservative Party, because of course I am in leading a coalition government, when it comes to Conservatives sitting round the cabinet table, I'm proud to say a third of them are now women.
Having rightly reaffirmed his confidence in the Transport Secretary, can I urge my right honourable friend to urge him to give early priority to the improvement of the railway lines serving East Anglia?
I'm well aware of this problem and some of the campaigns, such as the Norwich in 90 campaign, and I know that my right honourable friend, the Transport Minister, now backed by a larger team of ministers, additional ministers in the Transport Department, will give that their urgent attention.
Mr. Ed Miliband.
Mr. Speaker, we've always said that we will support the government when they do the right thing. So can I join thousands of parents across the country in congratulating him on getting rid of the Education Secretary? Why did he demote him?
I hope, before answering the question, I hope the whole House can come together in this way, which is the right honourable member for North West Hampshire has served in this House of Commons for over 40 years, and he'll be retiring at the next election. And so when it came to replacing an extraordinary politician and someone who's given so much to this country as the Chief Whip, I wanted to find the very best candidate, and I'm proud to have done so in the former Education Secretary.
He's obviously got a very short memory, Mr. Speaker, because this is what he used to say about the Education Secretary. I want to trust the Education Secretary to get on with that job for many years, rather than saying, I'm now going to shove you over somewhere else. So why did he do it? Is it the shortage of primary school places, the unqualified teachers, or the failure of his free schools?
Let me tell you what the former Education Secretary achieved. A record number of academies, new free schools, standards rising across the country, and reforms that will endure. But isn't it extraordinary? Isn't it extraordinary that on a day of a record increase in the numbers of work in our country, he will do anything not to talk about economic recovery, deficit falling, economy growing, numbers in work rising. I'm not surprised he doesn't want to talk about people in work. His own job looks a bit shaky.
Speaker, I'm bound to say, if it's all been such a great success, I still don't know why he sacked the Education Secretary. And let's talk about the figures today. We have welcomed the fall in unemployment, but his real problem is that this recovery is not benefiting most working people who are working harder, for longer, for less. There are 7 million people who are in working families who are paid so little they're in poverty. Does he think the economy is working for them?
Well, first of all, let me bring the House up to date on the unemployment figures that have been released this morning. We see employment employment up by 254,000 this quarter. We see women's employment up. We see youth employment up. And we see the unemployment count falling by 121,000. And we have reached an important milestone in our country, which is more people in work in our country than ever before in our history. We can now say that since this government came to office, there are 1.8 million more people in work. That is a record that we can be proud of, and something that the Labour leader has raised week after week. Long-term youth unemployment, that is now lower than when this government came to office. Now, of course, it is disappointing pay isn't rising faster, but let me remind him what the director of the Institute for Fiscal Studies said. He said this: we've had a great big recession. We had the biggest recession we've had in 100 years, and it will be astonishing if household incomes haven't fallen and earnings haven't fallen. That is what's happened, and we know who's responsible for the great economic recession, because extraordinarily, they're still in their jobs.
Mr. Speaker, he's in his 5th year as Prime Minister, and all he can do is try and blame someone else. And he just doesn't get it. And he just doesn't get it. This week, we saw shocking figures about another group suffering from the cost of living crisis. Millions of young people whose earnings are falling faster than everyone else, 1 in 4 of them living with their parents because they can't afford to buy a house or even rent one. Does he honestly think they're feeling the benefit of the recovery?
Of course, we want living standards to recover faster, and there are 2 things you need to do to make that happen. First of all, get more people into work, and we're getting people into work. And secondly, cut spending so you can cut taxes, which is exactly what we're doing. Now, yesterday, Labour announced, in an important announcement, that it is now their policy to put up taxes on middle-income people. Perhaps he can now get to his feet and tell us which taxes on which people.
Ask the questions and he fails to answer them. And the reality is, he has the worst record on living standards of any Prime Minister in history. But there is one group who is feeling that they're shouting weak. I'll tell them what's weak. It's saying a month ago from that dispatch box he's happy with his team and then sacking part of his team. Now, there is one group who is feeling the benefit of the recovery. Can he confirm that while average pay is down £1,600 a year since the last election, last year the top 1% took home an extra £15 billion after his millionaire's tax cut?
I've got to say, Mr. Speaker, I'm happy with my team, and looking at the Shadow Chancellor, I'm pretty happy with his team too. Mr. Speaker, one of the things that wasn't noticed that happened yesterday, the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party on the radio said this, and I want to quote it very precisely: I think people on middle incomes should contribute more through their taxes. That is what she said. That is, they should. There we are. That is their policy. The squeezed middle will be squeezed more. Now he needs to tell us which people are going to pay which taxes, because on this side of the House we've cut council tax, we've cut petrol duty, we've cut the jobs tax, we've increased the marriage couples allowance. Labour would put a tax on your job, on your mortgage, on your home and on your pension. So tell us, where are the middle income taxes coming?
Mr. Speaker, this is totally desperate stuff, but he has nothing to say about the cost of living crisis. That is the reality. And his reshuffle had nothing to do with the country and everything to do with his party. After 4 years of this government, we've got a recovery people can't feel, a cost of living crisis people can't deny, and a Prime Minister people can't believe.
What is clear, he talks about 5 years under this government, we've got record numbers in work, the economy growing, record numbers of businesses, record numbers of women in work, our health service is improving, and Mr. Speaker, everyone can see the contrast. In this party, the leader reshuffles the cabinet. In his party, the shadow cabinet desperately want to reshuffle the leader.
Right honourable gentleman is delighted to be lauded in such enthusiastic fashion. Mr Kennedy.
It's just like the old days, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, as the Prime Minister's enjoying a week in which he's making a lot of new best friends, when he gets to the Brussels summit, would he give a particularly warm greeting to the man who might yet be his best, certainly his newest, President Juncker, who yesterday called for more European reform and warned applicant states who want to join the European Union face a complex, difficult and drawn-out period of up to perhaps 5 years. As we don't meet before the Scottish referendum, barring a recall, shouldn't the Scots voters bear those words in mind?
Well, Mr Speaker, this is a remarkable moment where the Right Honourable Gentleman, Jean-Claude Juncker, have together said something which I wholeheartedly agree with. It is noticeable what he said, that there wouldn't be new members joining the European Union in the next 5 years, and I think that is very important in the context of the Scottish referendum debate. But I will take him up on one point. He says we're not going to meet again before the Scottish referendum. In terms of my diary, I think actually the House of Commons will be meeting in September.
Mr Jonathan Reynolds.
Can the Prime Minister explain why he's now given more knighthoods to men that he's sacked, that he's given cabinet jobs to women?
Yeah. More women. Always interesting to take a lecture from a party that gave a knighthood to Fred Goodwin. That is always a good place to start. I have appointed more women to the front bench, more women to our cabinet, on the basis that they deserve those jobs, and I want a team that reflects modern Britain and can be everything that modern Britain needs it to be. I make no apology for saying I think in public life we should recognise public service, people who have worked hard, people who contributed to our nation, contributed to our government. I think that is a good thing to do.
This is Cheryl Gillan.
Mr. Speaker, people with autism have specific social and communications needs, which can cause distress and misunderstanding, particularly when they're admitted to hospital for routine or emergency treatment. Would the Prime Minister join me in congratulating Baroness Angela Browning and the National Autistic Society, who tomorrow are going to launch the new hospital passport for people with autism? I think that will make a great difference to a lot of people's lives in this country.
No, well, I thank the my right honourable friend for raising this important issue. Baroness Browning has worked very hard on this issue over many years in both houses, as has my right honourable friend with the autism bill that I think is making a huge difference to the way that we help young people with these conditions. And I absolutely join her in making sure that these services are properly put together.
Mr Gareth Thomas.
Mr Speaker, given recent data shows that the gender pay gap is increasing again, can the Prime Minister confirm the excellent news that any woman not receiving equal pay for equal work will now have their salary topped up from Tory party funds?
Well, what I would say to the honourable gentleman is, first of all, it is welcome news that under this government the pay gap and those below the age of 40 has all but disappeared. So we are making progress. In terms of the Leader of the House of Lords, I'm happy to confirm that she will do the same job as her predecessor, will sit at the same place around the cabinet table as her predecessor, and receive the same amount of money.
Caroline Noakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Charlotte's Helix is part of an international research project seeking to establish a link between the DNA of anorexia nervosa sufferers. This afternoon, the project is coming to Parliament, seeking to obtain DNA samples from former sufferers, including my honourable friend, the member for Braintree. Will my right honourable friend commend the work of Charlotte's Helix and all those who have been brave enough to speak out about their struggles with eating disorders?
No, I very much thank my honourable friend for raising this issue. I'm sure that everyone in this House has friends or family who have been affected by this condition and who desperately wants to see the help that we provide as a country improve. And so I would commend the bravery of all those who've spoken out about their experience with eating disorders. It's not an easy thing to do. We need to learn more about these conditions so we can provide the right kind of support. And in that context, I think what the government's doing about palliative esteem for mental health conditions is important as well.
You are Ranker Davis.
Mr. Speaker, we now know for certain that taxpayers last year were robbed of around £1 billion because of the botched bargain basement fire sale of Royal Mail. Yeah. Will he now do as the Biz Select Committee have asked and publish the list of those preferential investors? And when will somebody be held to account for this Royal Mail fiasco?
I have to say, I just completely disagree with the honourable gentleman. For year after year, Royal Mail lost money, the taxpayer had to back it up, and in this government we've achieved what no previous government has achieved, which is a successful privatisation of the Royal Mail. The taxpayer has received money from that sale, and we now receive the tax on the profits of Royal Mail rather than the losses and the mismanagement of the Labour years.
Mr. Andrew Jones.
Mr. Speaker, later this year, North Yorkshire will become the best connected county in terms of superfast broadband. This is hugely helpful for our growing hospitality and tourism industry, which already provides thousands of jobs in my Harrogate and Knaresborough constituency, and received a wonderful boost from the recent visit of the Tour de France. Does my right honourable friend agree that rolling out superfast broadband is a great boost for jobs in all sectors, not just hospitality, and that it will help build upon the wonderful economic legacy of the Tour de France?
Well, can I first of all thank my honourable friend for the warm welcome that he gave me and people in Harrogate gave me for the Tour de France, the completion of that final stage, marred only by Mark Cavendish's very tragic accident in the Tour de France, but it was an extraordinary event and showed his constituency and the whole of Yorkshire absolutely in its best light. He's quite right about the importance of superfast broadband. We're putting £790 million into superfast broadband access. We've got 500,000 UK premises connected already. Around 400,000 new premises are being upgraded every week. And I think, frankly, everyone in this House has a duty to get out there and help to advertise what's happening with broadband and to encourage take-up rates.
Jack Straw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is fundamental, is it not, that the holder of the office of Attorney General should be fearlessly independent, defend the rule of law, and be ready to speak legal truth to power. Yeah. Given the distinction and respect with which the holder of that office pursued that role, what possessed the Prime Minister to dismiss him yesterday?
Well, first of all, can I say I absolutely agree with the right honourable gentleman that it's vitally important that the Attorney General gives unvarnished, independent advice and is the government's legal advisor. But I also believe in government, when someone has served extremely well for 4 years, there are often times when it's right to bring on new talent and to make the most of all the talent you have in your party. That is the approach I take as Prime Minister, and I explain that very clearly to my team.
Julian Smith.
Mr. Speaker, the number of young people coming off the unemployment register across North Yorkshire is at a record high. Would the Prime Minister agree that today's small business bill, Conservative inspired, is yet another boost to the women and men who are creating the jobs to make this happen?
I thank my honourable friend for his question. I mean, today's bill will help make the United Kingdom the most attractive and easy place to start, to finance and to grow a small business. That is our ambition. He's absolutely right about these unemployment figures. In his own constituency, the claimant count has fallen by 37% in the last year, by 51% since the election. And the long-term youth claimant count, because this is the most important thing, is to make sure that young people are getting those opportunities. The long-term youth claimant count is down 60% in the last year.
Mr. Pat McFadden.
The last two European commissioners from the UK have held major portfolios central to our interests. The outgoing commissioner has been the spokesperson for foreign affairs, and her predecessor held the trade portfolio. So could I ask the Prime Minister, what post does he hope to secure for his nominee, Lord Hill, as the consolation prize for his failure to stop the appointment of Mr Juncker? And how this time does he intend to build support accomplish his objective?
Well, first of all, I think it's a good moment for everyone across the House to pay tribute to Cathy Ashton and the very good work that she's done as the High Representative, effectively the Foreign Minister for Europe, over the last 4 years in what is a gruelling and exhausting job. I think there is an opportunity, and we'll be discussing these issues tonight, or whether there'll be a resolution or not, I don't know. But I think there is an opportunity to make sure that Britain has an important portfolio, one where we can maximise our influence in the areas that we care about most, and those are areas to do with our economy, and that we will look and work very hard to do that. I think that Lord Hill, with his experience in the previous Conservative government and in this government, holding as it is the equivalent post that Baroness Ashton held before she became a commissioner, will do a very good job for our country.
Sir Robert Smith.
Speaker, as you know, my constituency is very dependent on investment in the oil and gas industry, where the unemployment rate is now currently 0.5%. Therefore, the Prime Minister will understand that there is some concern with the reshuffle where both the Treasury Minister and the Energy Minister responsible for that industry has changed yet again. So will he take this opportunity to reconfirm the commitment to implement the Wood Review as announced by the Secretary of State in a written statement today?
Well, I think my honourable friend makes an important point. North Sea oil is absolutely vital. Making sure we have the tax regime appropriately in place and implementing the Wood Review is absolutely something we're committed to. I think my honourable friend, the member for Whittam, will do an excellent job, and I'm delighted to welcome her to the Treasury.
Dan Jarvis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the 4th of August, people from across the country will come together to mark 100 years since the outbreak of the First World War. It's an important opportunity to commemorate a conflict that changed Britain forever. So can I ask the Prime Minister if he will join with us in supporting the 1418 Now Lights Out campaign, and if he will encourage people across the UK to turn out their lights between 10 and 11 p.m. on the 4th of August, so as a country we can pay a fitting tribute to those who sacrificed and served our country 100 years ago.
Yeah. No, I think the honourable gentleman is absolutely right to raise this excellent campaign, a campaign inspired by Sir Edward Grey's famous remark on the eve of the war that the lamps are going out all over Europe. And I think it is a way to get particularly young people engaged in what happened a century ago and to understand the consequences for Europe and for our world and for our society. There are a lot of events that are going to take place this year to commemorate appropriately the First World War. I think one of the most significant as well will be tomorrow when the Imperial War Museum, an absolutely superb museum, has a major investment and is reopening for the public. And I'm sure that many people, I know my own children enjoy going there, many people will make the most of it.
Mr. Stephen O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the North West's and Cheshire's proud history of contributing significantly to our national economy, would my right honourable friend agree how important the rapid, safe development of fracking is to boost not only the future competitiveness of our country, but also in the North West, to continue to be a significant contributor to our future wealth and welfare?
No, and I think my right honourable friend makes a very important point, and it is good news that obviously in the North West we've seen the claimant count, for instance, in his constituency come down 40% in the last year. But if we want to sustain the increase in employment and sustain our economic growth, then we should not hold ourselves back from new sources of energy, including unconventional gas. And it is striking that in the United States they've have something like 100,000 unconventional gas wells dug, whereas in the whole of Europe is something like 100. We have about 3/4 as much unconventional gas across the EU as there is in America. I don't want us to miss out on this. It could help to deliver more competitive energy prices. It will help to keep our economy competitive and our industry competitive, and I think it's vital for the future of our country.
Joan Wally.
Speaker, Parliament might be about to close down for the summer, but can I tell the Prime Minister that even that won't stop people having babies, getting injured and needing routine and emergency care on the NHS? So in the light of the forthcoming report into safety at Stafford Hospital by the CQC, can he have a word with his friend, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and make sure that the Treasury is going to fund in full the changes to health services across North Staffordshire that the University Hospital in Stoke-on-Trent has to provide, and which has to provide at no extra cost to the health of people in Stoke-on-Trent?
Well, I certainly take into account what the Honourable Lady says. I'm following the situation in Staffordshire very closely. closely and are regularly advised about it. Changes do need to take place. This inspection that's taking place is absolutely vital. I think the important thing in the health service is where we have problems is not to try and hide them, but to properly address them. And actually today, Bruce Keogh is reporting a year on from his report when he took something like 11 hospitals into special measures. And what his report will show is all 11 of those are making improvements. 5 of them are able to come out of special measures altogether. And we need to make sure we see improvements in all our hospitals.
Anne-Marie Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Prime Minister for supporting the West Country, particularly investment in our railway in Dawlish and in broadband. Does he agree that our recently announced growth deal of £130 million needs to be matched by a fairer funding formula for rural councils like mine in Devon, which play a vital part in delivering the government's long-term economic plan?
I think the Honourable Lady makes an important point. I think we must continue supporting transport infrastructure in the southwest. We've got the important report on Dawlish coming out. The work is being done right now in terms of making sure it is more resilient. We've had the important announcement about the sleeper service down to the southwest and announcements about a number of other road and rail schemes. I'll look very carefully about what she says about fair funding, because it is important that everyone can see that these situations are fair.
Julie Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Office of Budget Responsibility figures show that the government's new system of student fees will add £15 billion more than expected to the government debt by the end of this Parliament. Hasn't the government got it all wrong when it comes to tuition fees?
Well, of course, Mr. Speaker, what we were told by the party opposite is that no one would take up these loans, no one from poorer backgrounds would go anywhere near university, and the numbers going to university would collapse. Now, what has actually happened is record numbers are going to universities, record numbers from low-income backgrounds are going. Obviously, we need to make sure that this system is cost-efficient, but I'm satisfied it's working, and the Chancellor, of course, announced in his recent budget that far from having problems with the funding, we are uncapping the numbers that can go to university. That is the aspiration society we're building in this country.
Julian Sturdy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Unemployment has more than halved in my constituency since 2010. And York is poised to benefit from a multi-million-pound investment through 3 agri-science projects as it strives to become a world-class centre of excellence in agriculture. Would my right honourable friend not agree that this clearly demonstrates our commitment to tackling the north-south divide and delivering a northern-led long-term economic plan?
Well, I'm delighted to share with my honourable friend that, of course, the claimant count in his constituency is down by 42% over the last year and down by 61% since the election. Look, I know Labour don't want to hear about falling unemployment numbers, the numbers of people in work, but the fact is every single one of these people getting a job is about someone having a livelihood and the chance to provide for their family. That's what this is about. He's absolutely right to raise the importance. He's absolutely right to raise the importance of the agricultural industries and linked industries in Yorkshire. I'm sure that the new Agriculture and Environment Secretary will want to make an early visit to her birthplace of Yorkshire.
Mr. Ian Lucas.
Specialist spinal cord injury beds are a precious resource for people and patients in desperate need. Why is it, therefore, that on the Prime Minister's watch, specialist beds at the Stoke Mandeville Spinal Injuries Centre are being used for people who do not have spinal cord injuries? What?
Obviously, decisions are for individual trusts and individual clinical commissioning groups themselves, but we made 2 important decisions as a government. First, to fund the NHS with extra money, £12.7 billion in this Parliament, and second, to abolish the bureaucracy that had built up under Labour with 17,000 fewer bureaucrats. Both those decisions were opposed by the Labour Party, but we can see 7,000 more doctors, 4,000 more nurses, more patients treated, and an NHS that's doing well.
Richard Ottaway.
Mr. Speaker, in the recent case of Nicholson on the question of assisted dying, Lord Neuberger, the President of the Supreme Court, said that Parliament now had the opportunity to consider reform of the law in the knowledge that if Parliament doesn't act, the courts may. This could raise serious constitutional issues. Does he agree that whatever your views on the subject, the other place is to be commended for having a debate, but what the public really want is a debate in this House?
Well, first of all, what I would say to my right honourable friend is that I think it is good a debate is being held, and I'm sure it will be worthwhile reading the debate that takes place on Friday in the other place. I'm very happy for a debate to be held here, and of course there are now opportunities for backbenchers to hold debates in the chamber, and I'm sure the new Leader of the House of Commons, who I'm sure we want to welcome to his place, will be listening carefully to that request. For myself, I'm not convinced that further steps need to be taken. I worry about legalising euthanasia, and people might be being pushed into things that they don't actually want for themselves, but by all means, let's have the debate.
Mr. Speaker, returning to the issue of taxes on the wealthy, when will the Prime Minister keep his promise and publish his tax return?
Well, on the subject of taxes and middle-income people, when are we going to get an answer from Labour about what was it the Deputy Leader of the party meant when she said, and let me repeat it again for the record, I think people on middle incomes should contribute more through their taxes. There is, as we go into the summer, there is one party in this House with a big tax problem, and I'm looking at it.
Paul Burstow. Mr. Speaker, given that poor mental health is the single biggest driver of well-being in this country, will he act on a recommendation from the think tank Centre Forum and tackle the £23 billion cost to business of poorly supporting mental health by this government signing up to the employers' mindful framework and tackling those issues by giving a lead as a government?
Very good. Well, I will look very carefully at the Centre Forward report that he mentions. I think it is important, and he helped to do this in government, that we now have a situation where mental health is given proper parity of esteem through the NHS Constitution. We've made good progress in terms of making available more talking therapies for mental health patients in the NHS, but I'll look carefully at the report he suggests.
Order.